Hello YouTube. So I came across this philosopher personality test which measures which of 7 venerable philosophers you resemble the most. I have actually taken this test before, so I do kind of know what to expect here, but I thought it might make for a fun video. Obviously this is silly nonsense, but maybe it's entertaining nonsense, so why not? Well, actually, I say it's nonsense. The test website does make it very clear that this test has been made by professionals using statistical controls to ensure maximum accuracy and validity of the test scores. So we're doing science here today, okay? All right, let's get going. So, question 1. I make use of long chains of logical arguments in my thinking so as to root out any contradictions or uncertainties. I am inclined to disagree with this one. Obviously, the kind of method that's being described here is, I suppose, the standard method of analytic philosophy. And I have been trained in analytic philosophy, and of course, this is something that I am capable of doing. But I think, there are some philosophers who will construct these really sophisticated, intricate chains of reasoning. You know, they'll have like 11 main premises leading to a conclusion, and then each of those premises is defended by like 7 sub-premises or whatever. So you have this really beautifully constructed argumentative structure which leads to their conclusion. And that's not really the way that I tend to approach philosophy. I don't tend to do that so much. I think that the best kinds of philosophical arguments are ones that are more simple, more intuitive. I like philosophical arguments that sort of start with just simple ideas or simple premises and then lead you to outrageous conclusions. That's my favourite kind of philosophy. And so, and for me, I think, I'm not so concerned about rooting out contradiction or uncertainty. Indeed, as far as I'm concerned, uncertainty is kind of the goal, right? Like, I think that philosophy is at its best when it is critical or skeptical. I think philosophy is best as a tool for attacking beliefs and resisting dogmatism. Ideally, right after you have read philosophy, you should go away thinking, "Oh my God, I have no idea what's going on." Like that should be what you end up with. Whereas there is a way of approaching philosophy where it's like it's a matter of just building these little fortresses that you can use to defend your beliefs. I'm not so keen on that, right? I like to use philosophy as a tool to attack beliefs rather than to build up fortresses that defend belief. And of course, as for contradiction, well, I don't have a problem with dialetheism. I can get on board with true contradictions. So I'm not really so worried about, I'm not so focused on rooting out contradiction or uncertainty. Having said all of that, I won't completely disagree with this because, like, look, I am basically an analytic. That's what I have been trained in. That's what I do. So, I do this a little bit to some extent, but it's, again, not the main way I approach philosophy. Our minds can never comprehend reality exactly as it is. I will say that I pretty strongly agree with this one. I'm very much on the more skeptical side. I think that there are a bunch of skeptical arguments which are basically unassailable. You know, there's a bunch of arguments where when I read them, I find my mind running into this fog, this sense of just uncertainty. Actually, I suppose because I'm inclined to endorse some sort of relativism or constructivism about truth, maybe in some sense I would be happy to say that we can comprehend reality exactly as it is. If you want to say that reality is just made up, right? It's just a fiction that we've invented. I just invent reality, and therefore I do in fact comprehend reality exactly as it is. If you wanted to say something like that, I don't know, maybe I could get on board with it. But I take it that what's being suggested here is more the sort of traditional realist idea that there's a mind-independent world, and then, our theories and models and so on might correspond to that world. I do not think that. That is not my view. So yeah, I'll say that I agree. Yeah, we can never comprehend reality as it really is. Beautiful language is not as important as people make it out to be. People should say what they mean as briefly and plainly as possible. So, in the context of doing philosophy, which is how I'm choosing to approach these questions, I think I would basically agree with that. When I read philosophy, what I'm looking for is interesting arguments. I want it to give me new insight into things. I want it to show me a new way of seeing the world. And stylish, beautiful language isn't really that important for that. I mean, it's a nice bonus. When I think about my all-time favourite philosophers, then they are good stylists. Paul Feyerabend is a really great writer. Ian Hacking, he's a good writer. I think there's some really beautiful stuff by Nelson Goodman, W.V.O. Quine. So it does, it does make a difference. But ultimately, what I care about is just the arguments, and I think that when we do philosophy, philosophy is often quite tricky. The ideas are tricky. The arguments are tricky. So please, when you express those arguments, express them as briefly and plainly as you can. I don't want to have to work to figure out what it is you're trying to say. That annoys me, right? Like if I have to do like work of interpreting what somebody is trying to express, I find that very frustrating. So I do prefer it when things are just made as plain as possible. So yeah, I guess I should say I mean, again, obviously beautiful language is good. I won't say I fully agree with that, but I lean towards agreeing. My view of life is often misunderstood. I don't think so. I mean, I could be wrong. I feel like okay, my views might be seen as a bit nuts in some ways, but I don't think people misunderstand me to any greater extent than, is the norm, right? Like, so I'll say I disagree. Animals are better people than most people. I have no opinion on this one way or the other. There is always a clear right and wrong course of action in every moral dilemma. Well, I'll say I completely disagree. First of all, I'm a hardcore moral anti-realist. I tend to think that there just are no moral facts, or maybe there are moral facts, but we just make them up. But yeah, if I face a moral dilemma, there are going to be situations where I just feel uncertainty. And it's not the case that there's some sort of independent fact of the matter about what I ought to do. So that sense of uncertainty might just never get resolved. And of course, even if it does get resolved, it's not that I'm getting the moral facts. So I'll say I disagree. I shock people by saying outrageous and offensive things. This is a hard one because I feel like this is one of these cases where my actual personality doesn't quite match up to my idealized personality. I would certainly like to be the kind of person who shocks people by saying outrageous and offensive things. And there was a time in my life when I was that person. Look, I was brought up on the early 2000s internet, right? It was a wild west back then, and that was the place to be if you were an edgelord. Was the early 2000s internet, and I have always been kind of an edgelord. I definitely have a bit of edgelord in me, and I still wish that I still do try to express the edgelord. I still try to do a bit of edgelording, even to this day. But there's a few reasons why it's sort of a bit more limited now. I mean, part of it's just practical, right? Like, I have a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel will get banned if I say things that are too outrageous. Also, I've been educated. I've been institutionalized in academia for like a decade, and I have been inculcated with certain norms and values, which has led me to have at least a veneer of semi-professionalism. So So yeah, I just sort of for that reason, I'm maybe a bit more mild now. I suppose that, I mean, there are other reasons as well. You know, one of the things that has really bothered me is like in the last kind of few years, there's been the rise of actual fascists, right? Like there's like actually awful people who are kind of doing the outrageous and offensive thing, but they're like doing it to further political goals, which are genuinely horrifying, and genuinely awful. And I don't want to be part of that. Actually, even I mean, like even when you put aside the rise of like outright fascism, like outright neo Nazis, a lot of the people who are part of this kind of like who see themselves as being part of the like free speech movement, a lot of them are just kind of boring conservatives whose idea of being outrageous and offensive is basically just going to amount to being mean to trans people or something like that. And it's just like, I don't want to be part of that. Like go back a few decades, the people who were outrageous and offensive were really cool. It was people like John Waters and Frank Zappa and Gigi Allen. That's what I want. That's the kind of crowd that I want to be in. I do think that it is valuable to offend people. I think that look, I value living in a free society. I want to live in a world where everybody feels able to express their ideas however they see fit. That's just something that to me, is just intrinsically valuable. And so, I would tend to say that if somebody is offended by something, there actually is a value in offending them. Or maybe one way to put it is, to me, the fact that someone finds something offensive, the mere fact that something is offensive, is no good reason not to do it. In fact, it may well be a reason to do it, right? It's a good thing to do things that are offensive to other people, because that's how you preserve free speech. As I'm saying this, as I'm recording this video, Roger Waters is under investigation by the German police, and lots of idiots on Twitter who have no sense of media literacy whatsoever are angry about Roger Waters because he performed the wall while dressed in a Nazi costume. Like, what is happening? Well, I mean, I know I know exactly what's happening to Roger Waters. Is he didn't sort of sign up to the conventional line on the Ukraine stuff, so people are targeting him now. But the point is, right, I look at something like that, and to me it's just like, okay, we need to be offending people much more, right? Like we should be doing all sorts of really shocking, outrageous, offensive things, and I kind of wish that I had the balls to do more of it. So I'm going to say that I kind of partly agree. I wish that I could say I fully agreed, but I'd be lying about my own personality. Okay, I'm moving on. Profound text cannot be truly good if it's not beautifully written. I feel like I've kind of already answered this. Yeah, I just disagree with that. I mean, like when I read philosophy, I'm interested in reading the arguments, and there can be texts that deliver profound and beautiful insights, even if they're not written in a beautiful style. So let's go next. Generally speaking, only the highest specimens of humanity interest me. Oh man, that's phrased in a way that is unfathomably cringy. But if I'm being honest, I'm gonna have to say I kind of lean towards agreeing. The thing is, I don't like ordinary people. I'm not interested in them. I don't want to talk to them. Frankly, I don't even want to look at them. Okay, I don't even like going outside and seeing ordinary people. Look, I'm sorry, all right. Like, I enjoy talking about philosophy and a few other topics, but yeah, when it just comes to like the general public, I just want nothing to do with them. And I'm not saying that like I'm a higher specimen of humanity, whatever that's supposed to mean, but I'm just saying, like, personally, I don't really, I'm really an introvert, and I don't enjoy interacting with ordinary people. And it really annoys me that modern philosophy puts so much weight on what the ordinary person thinks, or on common sense, right? So when you sort of look at the way that a lot of philosophy proceeds these days, there is a lot of epistemic weight put on the idea that certain, so there'll be certain views which are favoured because they are more intuitive or because they are more in line with common sense. I mean, this is the sort of tradition of Morean arguments, for instance. And my phone is going. Who's that? That's my brother. I'm not. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. This is irritating. I'm just going to. Okay. I'm going to pause this. Okay. I'm back. Yes. What was I saying? In philosophy today, there is this tendency to favour theories that are more in line with common sense, or we present theories as giving accounts of what like ordinary people think or say. But the thing is, I couldn't care less what ordinary people think or say, and I do not think there's anything valuable about a theory that accommodates common sense. We just shouldn't be concerned about that. Ordinary people suck, the common man sucks, and common sense sucks, and I wish philosophers would stop treating it as if it had some sort of epistemic weight. Okay. A life marked by the My phone is ringing again. What is this? Okay, I'm going to have to... Oh, Jesus. Okay then, I'm back again. Right. A life marked by the absence of pain is better than a life marked by the presence of pleasure. Yes, I totally agree with that one. Very, very strongly. At least for me. So, the thing is, the way I look at it is this. I think that the badness of pain is far greater than the goodness of pleasure. So here's how I look at it, right? Suppose some genie came to me and offered me 2 weeks of the greatest pleasures I could imagine. So it's just like the best 2 weeks I could possibly have. And let's even imagine that I get to do things beyond my current biological capacities, so I get to fly around like a bird. This is the ideal 2 weeks. It's paradise for 2 weeks. But in exchange for this 2 weeks of paradise, I have to undergo 1 hour of the worst pains. I have to do 1 hour of being tortured by a Mexican cartel or something like that. There is no way I would take that trade. I think you'd have to be crazy to take that trade. I mean, who would take that trade? You'd be nuts. In fact, not only would I not take that trade, I wouldn't even do 1 hour of the worst pains that I have in fact experienced. So, for me, I've had panic attacks before, and panic attacks are horrible. During a panic attack, there's a peak of the panic attack that's like 2 to 3 minutes, and it really is just overwhelming terror. And if you said to me, I could have 2 weeks in paradise for 1 hour of the peak of a panic attack, extended for 1 hour, no way, absolutely not. I just think that pain and suffering is really bad, it's to me, if I could eliminate all future pains, that would just be so wonderful. Whereas, pleasure is nice, but I don't know. I'm not particularly motivated by pleasure, right? But I am motivated to avoid pain. So I'll say that I strongly agree with that. I ask questions that others consider crazy. I guess probably to some extent. I mean, I definitely hold views that other people consider crazy. I'm not so sure that the questions would be considered crazy. I suppose for anyone outside of philosophy, some of the questions would be considered crazy. I don't know. I'll say I lean towards agreeing with this, because certainly I think that I have a somewhat unusual take on a lot of philosophical topics, at least relative to what is currently the norm in philosophy. So I'll say that I lean towards agreeing. There is much about the world that we can never know with certainty. Well, I've kind of already put my cards on the table with this one, haven't I? As I've said, I think that there are many skeptical arguments which are just successful. I mean, in the sense that they successfully lead me to give up my beliefs. That's always been the case, actually. I haven't always been. I haven't always been so far on the skeptical side, but as soon as I encountered these sorts of skeptical arguments, so things like the brain in the vat kind of argument. If you don't know you're not a brain in a vat, you don't know you have hands. You don't know you're not a brain in a vat, so you don't know you have hands. That kind of argument always just struck me as basically watertight. I don't think there's any convincing responses to it, and so even when I first encountered philosophy back to even back then, I would have been inclined to a sort of Humean position where I would have said, well, yeah, I mean, ultimately there just is no justification for my beliefs, but I find my beliefs, they just sort of impose themselves on me, regardless of the fact that there's no justification. But certainly, I just said certainly. I was going to say, certainly there's no certainty. So what I can say is that I'm very sloppy with my language when I'm talking off the top of my head. But yeah, I would basically agree with this, that in fact, it's not just that, not only would I say that there's much about the world we can never know with certainty, there's just nothing that we can know with certainty. Maybe there's nothing we can know at all. I stir up controversy simply for the sake of arguments. Well, the thing is, I think there's a great value in controversy for its own sake, in exploring arguments just for their own sake. I've mentioned that I think that philosophy is at its most valuable when it is a tool for criticism. So philosophy, if I was to think about what kind of contribution can philosophy make when philosophy is at its best, I would say that it is a tool for resisting dogmatism. And part of the way that you do that is by exploring controversial ideas and exploring arguments just for their own sake. On the other hand, when I express my own views, I'm not doing that simply for the sake of arguments. I mean, I am being honest and authentic about what my views are, but I guess I'll lean towards saying I agree with this, because yeah, I can explore arguments for their own sake, and I think that's a good thing to do. So, our base desires as human beings are coarse and vulgar. Absolutely not. I think our base desires are probably the best of the bunch. I mean, okay, well, what are the base desires? I take it it's things like food and sleep and sex, and love. These are the basic drives that all, maybe not all, I mean, there are some people who are asexual, aromantic, whatever, but most normal human beings kind of have just these sort of basic kind of biological urges, and I think that those are the sources of the most kind of reliable kind of satisfaction in life. Just being able to eat a really pleasing meal, or get into a comfortable bed. I mean, there's just nothing better than that, as far as I'm concerned. So I agree. I mean, I disagree with that thing. If people challenge or confront me, I confront them right back with little fear of the consequences. This is going to depend so much on the kind of challenging question. If there is any sense of there being a physical threat, if that's involved in the challenge, then I will absolutely not confront people back. I will run away. I'm a total coward. I'm not going to put myself in any physical danger. When it comes to philosophy, obviously, I'm happy to engage in arguments and present my ideas for criticism, and that can be very fun, that sort of back and forth. So I don't really have much fear of the consequences in that context. On the other hand, even when it comes to philosophical debate, I do not like heated debate. If it seems like things are getting heated, if people are actually getting angry about it, then I just lose interest. So, but okay, look. So, yeah, I won't always confront people. On the other hand, I do kind of enjoy it when people hate me. When people hate me for what I think are stupid reasons. And if you hate me, it is almost certainly going to be for what I think are stupid reasons. I'm reminded of when I uploaded that vasectomy video, and there were a whole bunch of morons who got mad about the fact that I had decided to sterilize myself. So yeah, I had a lot of haters, and I love it. I love the haters. I love it when I'm driving a car. I'm a slow driver, and because I'm a slow driver, people tailgate me. And ooh, I love being tailgated. It's because I know that the person in the car behind me, it's just a total stranger. I've never met them before, but I know that they're sitting there raging because they're going to be like 2 minutes later to the shops than they would otherwise have been, and I'm causing that, and they hate me because of it. It gives me this lovely, warm, fuzzy feeling inside. So yeah, look, I don't really know whether to agree or disagree with this one, so I'm just going to keep that in the middle there. Most people need to be led and controlled. Well, no, this brings out my more libertarian, anarchistic sentiments. I do not like controlling people, and I don't like people who do like controlling people. So I'm going to say I disagree with that. People fuss too much over their banal, everyday problems. Well, surely, I guess, yes, I think they do. Maybe I should even strongly agree with this one. Well, I don't know. I mean, so there are so many really serious problems that we should be doing something about, like climate change. Right? Climate change is terrifying. We should really be doing a lot more to deal with climate change. But are people, are people really that concerned about it? I mean, like, no, or, okay, what I consider to be one of the most serious problems is work, right? The fact that so many people have to spend so much of their lives just grinding away in jobs that they hate is appalling. It is horrifying that situation exists. I think that work is a scourge of human existence, and there are so many people who do not even recognize that as a problem. Like, you say that so if I say like work is a problem, a lot of people look at me like I'm crazy. They don't even think that that's a problem. And many of the people who do think it's a problem aren't really doing anything to solve it. And of course, I include myself in this. I'm not doing anything to solve climate change. I'm not doing anything to figure out how to radically restructure the economic system so as to eradicate work. Although, I don't know. I mean, as I mentioned, I did have a vasectomy. So at the very least, I mean, look, if you can't solve these problems, if you can't end work, then at the very least, you shouldn't be imposing it, or you shouldn't be bringing other people into existence while these problems are still there. So I have at least contributed that much. But no, I admit, I spend my time just doing trivial, silly philosophy stuff. So it's not exactly a banal everyday problem. I'm not saying that I'm any better than other people, but yeah, I kind of feel like when I reflect on this, my intuitive reaction, the judgment I'm inclined to make is, yeah, we absolutely do spend too much time fussing over shit that just doesn't matter at all. Okay. I shock people with crass actions and words. Well, I guess I've already covered this. I would certainly like to be the kind of person who shocks people with crass actions and words, but the truth is, I am, a bit more professional. But like, okay, no, wait a minute. I mean, it's still there to some extent, right? Like, I am a bit of an edgelord, so I'm a bit more selective about how I express the edgelording, but I still do express it occasionally. So, yeah, and I think it's a valuable thing. I am more interested in things that can be measured than some pie-in-the-sky type of thinking. Absolutely not. So the way that I'm going to interpret this question is that when we're talking about things that can be measured, we're basically talking about science, right? Empirical study, empirical observation, and then pie-in-the-sky type of thinking, well, that's the kind of thinking that philosophers do, right? The philosophers, in the traditional sense of philosopher, right? Philosophers kind of sit around in their armchairs and think about abstract topics that have no practical utility whatsoever. I am a philosopher, and I make no apologies about that. I love philosophy, and I love being a philosopher. And so I have been, my specialization actually is in philosophy of science. And I find science fascinating. I love science. But there's different ways of approaching philosophy of science. So there are some philosophers of science who will uh, take themselves to be contributing to scientific debates. They will take themselves to be like actually taking like to be engaging in the scientific enterprise, or they'll be engaging with like philosophical problems that are very closely connected to practical issues in the scientific enterprise. So there are plenty of philosophers of science who will kind of get their hands dirty and they'll get into the science itself. So, think about philosophers who are involved in the debates about the interpretation of quantum mechanics or something like that. So these philosophers are like really directly interacting with stuff that matters to physicists, say. And yeah, this is the case for lots of philosophers of science. For me, though, I have the sort of approach I have is more like I will kind of use science as material for dealing with or for informing more traditional philosophical problems, purely philosophical problems. So take the scientific realism, scientific anti-realism debate. That's if I'm an expert on anything, that's what I'm an expert in. That's what I did my, BA dissertation, MA dissertation, my PhD. It was all about the scientific realism, anti-realism debate. And as far as I'm concerned, the realism, anti-realism debate is totally impractical. It really doesn't make any difference to science whether you are a realist or an anti-realist. So, a working scientist, it's not going to make any difference whether they adopt realism or anti-realism. I don't think it will anyway. I think the realism anti-realism debate is it's a very old philosophical problem. It's a purely philosophical problem. It arises in the specific context of science, but it's really very much pie in the sky sort of stuff, at least as I see it. So even though I had this interest in philosophy of science, even with that particular background, I would still say that I'm very much on the more pie in the sky side. So yeah, I disagree with this. No, I love philosophy, and if I didn't love philosophy, and if I had wanted to be involved in the getting my hands dirty with empirical measurements and stuff, I'd have gone into science rather than philosophy. So I make no apologies. The wise human being avoids the allure of power and fame. So I get what's being said here. So the point that's being made here is that if you pursue power and fame, you will almost certainly be disappointed. It's not going to lead to any lasting satisfaction. And I think that's probably true in most cases. I won't say for everybody, because at the end of the day, there's 8 billion people in the world, so I can't speak for all of them. But I think it's probably true in most cases that, yeah, if you pursue something like power and fame, you're probably not going to get much satisfaction out of it. Part of the problem is that when you try to gain, when you pursue power, it's sort of limitless, right? Like you can always have more power. You can always have more fame. So you might see yourself achieving a particular level of power and thinking that you'll be satisfied with that. But then when you get that power, you'll just want more, right? You will find that it loses its luster. I mean, it's just like anything else. I might really want some flashy new television. But then as soon as I acquire the new television, I just sort of take it for granted and it doesn't really produce that much pleasure. And I then just form a desire for some other new object, maybe the new car or the new house or whatever. And so the thing is, I do understand the point that's being made here, but the thing is, I don't think that that any other project you engage in is going to be any different. So the kind of problem that I have described here is one that just seems to be a general feature of the structure of human desire, rather than a specific feature of particular projects. For example, I do philosophy, and let's take this YouTube channel. So when I am writing a YouTube video, there's often a great deal of frustration and boredom. It's not a particularly pleasant process. The actual process of writing a video, of doing the research and doing the writing. But I imagine this future scenario where the video is completed, and I have gained the knowledge from writing it, and I've created something and put it out into the world, and I imagine I'm going to get pleasure from that. But what actually happens is, when I complete the video, I get maybe 5 minutes of pleasure, but then I just form a new desire to pursue a new topic, and then I'm just focused on that. And in fact, everything that I wrote in the previous video, I then forget pretty much all of it. You know, every video I do, I forget like 95% of the material within a couple of days. So there's nothing lasting. There's nothing permanent. There's no permanent achievement. There's no lasting satisfaction. What happens? It's rather just that there's this like endless, restless striving, as Schopenhauer might say, where I just find myself driven to pursue these goals, and I sort of imagine that when I achieve the goal, it's going to bring me satisfaction, but then it never does. And really, life is just this sort of endless series of frustrations, and you never really gain any sense of lasting satisfaction. I think that, yeah, at least for me, you know, the what the Buddhists say about desire, what someone like Schopenhauer says about desire, is true for my psychology. Again, maybe it's not true for everybody, but it's true for my psychology. So with all of that said, although I do get the point that's being made by this statement, I don't think there's an alternative. So I can say, yeah, if you pursue power and fame, you're not going to gain lasting satisfaction. But you know what? The same is true for anything else you might pursue. So the pursuit of power and fame is no worse off. The wise human being recognizes that life just sucks, and you are condemned to eternal frustration. Or maybe not eternal frustration. Maybe it's just a short period of frustration, and then you die. But that's kind of what I would say. Beauty in this world is proof that there is a transcendent higher world. I could not disagree more. First of all, I'm a total anti-realist about aesthetic values like beauty. I think beauty is just a matter of feelings. So I look at a mountain and it prompts these positive sensations in me. That's what beauty is. That's it. But I want to say something a bit more than this, because I think there's something kind of shallow about the idea that beauty is the highest aesthetic value. In fact, there's so much more. Art and aesthetics is so much deeper, so much richer than what you get from just beauty. Take something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original film. There is nothing beautiful about that film. I think the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a masterpiece. It's one of the greatest films, one of the greatest pieces of art ever created, and there is absolutely nothing beautiful about it. I mean, obviously, what is actually depicted in the film is horrifying and gruesome. I mean, it's really disturbing. Like, you're seeing this person. I mean, like, there are very long periods of the film where you're basically just seeing a person being, you know, tortured, and you're seeing them in extreme suffering. So that's not very pleasant to watch. But then, even beyond the content, just the way that the film is constructed is ugly. So if you just take like the way that the film stock looks, or the way that it's edited, or the set design, it's just constant. Like, everything about it seems raw and brutal and ugly. Like, when I watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right from the first minute of the film, I have this feeling of dry heat. It's like overwhelming heat, and it's sweaty and grimy and dirty. That's just how the film feels. It's like it's coming off the screen. It's overpowering. And that's just maintained throughout the whole film. It's really uncomfortable to watch in many ways, and I love it. So, to me, if you're going to say that beauty is proof that there's a transcendent higher world, I would say no. It's not beauty. It's aesthetic value more generally. So yes, there's the beautiful mountain, but like in front of the beautiful mountain, there's a lion eating a gazelle alive and pulling all of its guts out. and there's incredible suffering and pain. Now, look, yeah, that sucks, but like the if you're going to say that like it's the aesthetic value that is proof of the transcendent higher world, well, it's not just the beauty of the mountain. It's like the beauty of the mountain and this profound brutality and ugliness. That should be just as much proof of a transcendent higher world, I think. Okay then, so I say I disagree with this. I'll say next. Most people are unable to think for themselves. Yeah, I feel like, sure. Not just most people, I think basically all people. I'm not really sure what it would be to think for yourself. I take it that the way that I think, my values, my reasoning processes are products of inculcation into a particular culture. And of course, everybody has their own personal idiosyncrasies and so on. But yeah, I don't know. I can't escape my social environment. I don't think anyone can. The very way that I think about things is going to be because of how I was raised or because of the way I was trained, like going into academia or whatever. So I'd be kind of happy to say, yeah, I mean, we're like, okay, well, I'm not really thinking for myself. So, okay, next. I have a flair for controversy. Yeah, I think I do. I can be kind of contrarian. I have a contrarian streak. I have an edgelord in me, as I've mentioned. So I have a flair for controversy. Maybe I do not allow that flair to express itself as much as I would like, but it is there. Sexual attraction tends to lead people into bad situations. Well, I mean, look, there's two things that are very obviously true about sexual attraction. Number one is that sexual attraction is just wonderful. It's one of the things that makes life worth living. Well, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. I'm not sure anything makes life worth living, but it's one of the things that at least makes life bearable. But number two is that sexual attraction turns people into complete idiots. So, yeah, I mean, of course it leads people into bad situations, and very often, you can laugh about those bad situations afterwards. Actually, one of the things that I'm very grateful for is that there is a particular kind of bad situation that sexual attraction will now never lead me into, and that is the bad situation of reproduction. That's a bad situation that can result from sexual attraction, but I'm free of that worry because I am completely sterile. So, lovely. Of course, I'm sure there are plenty of other bad situations that I could be lured into by sexual attraction. Okay. The mind is basically like a machine. Yeah, I'll say I disagree with this. If I had to bet on it, I lean towards some sort of panpsychism or idealism. Again, if I had to bet, that's what I would go with. I'm getting another call. This video keeps getting interrupted. This is very irritating. All right, I'm back. So the mind is basically like a machine. Yeah. So I'm inclined to towards something like panpsychism or idealism if I had to take a bet on it. I mean, I don't really know. But when we draw this analogy to machines, I take it that the point is to illustrate some sort of physicalism, probably something like, functionalism or computationalism, where the idea is supposed to be that if you have the right arrangements of parts and the right relationships between different physical parts, then that will, realize or, that will produce consciousness, or rather, consciousness reduces to particular types of arrangements of parts. That's what this machine analogy is trying to illustrate, and I just don't accept that. I don't see any reason to buy that. So I'm going to say no. I don't think the mind is basically like a machine. People think I am much harsher and more hard-headed than I really am. I think that they do. I'm inclined to think people do. The reason why people make this mistake is because I am not a very compassionate person. I'm not very warm. Nobody would ever come to me with with an emotional problem looking for emotional comfort. I'm just not the guy that you come to for stuff like that. And, you know, I do have, as I said, pretty low compassion. That's not really a big feature of my personality. And so I think people confuse that for being like harsh and hard-headed. But I'm really not. I don't think I think I'm actually pretty cuddly. So yeah, I just disagree. Sorry, no, I agree. People do think I'm more harsh and hard-headed than I am. The best insight is gained by approaching a subject in a practical and orderly manner, indexing it and mapping out what is currently known about it. So, at least in the context of philosophy, I suppose I agree with this. I mean, certainly this is how I approach things. I think if you watch my videos, you can see that what I will tend to do is I present a kind of taxonomy of the available ideas. I explain the arguments in support of the different views, and I just try to do that in as simple and straightforward a way as possible so as to give people a map of the conceptual space. And I mean, does that provide the best insight? Well, it certainly provides insight in a way that I personally find useful, and, you know, all I can do when answering these questions is explain my own way of approaching these things. So I guess I agree with that. I mean, obviously this depends on the subject, right? So in philosophy, at least the kind of analytic philosophy that I tend to do, this is, I think, a useful way to approach it. I suppose if you're doing, you know, if you're an artist or something like that, I very much doubt that the best insight into art would be gained in this kind of way. But again, I'm just speaking for what I do when I answer these questions. I am a creature of habit. Yes, I strongly agree with that. I feel as though I am just driven by like impulses or whims that I don't really reflect that much on. And in fact, even when I do engage in critical reflection, even that just sort of feels like an automatic habit. So the sort of contexts which prompt me to engage in critical reflection, and the way in which I engage in critical reflection, the kind of reasoning processes that I use when I critically reflect, well, this is just something that I have been trained to do. It's just something, you know, like I have been trained in a particular academic tradition. Well, and not just academic, obviously that I've learned lots of things, but the point is, okay, I've been trained to do certain things. I've been trained to think in certain ways, and that to me feels like a habit. So I would say, yes, I am very much a creature of habit. Simple pleasures are the best. Okay, sorry for that interruption again. I had to go away because the dogs were barking. My brother's dogs, I hate them. And it's the middle of the night and they were just barking constantly. Right, okay, simple pleasures are the best. Yes, I completely agree with this. At least for me. So I'm not the sort of person who is very strongly attracted to wild and extreme pleasures. I'm never going to be interested in skydiving or mountaineering or anything like that. I like the simple creature comforts. I like laying in bed under warm covers. I like spending time with people I love. I like eating food. It doesn't even have to be gourmet food, just plain food. I will very happily just eat a bowl of plain broccoli or just beans or something. You know, I'll get a tin of pinto beans and just eat them plain. And I really gain a lot of pleasure from that. I really enjoy silence. Just having silence, as in no dogs constantly barking. It's lovely. Right, so I mock people who think they are all that so as to deflate their egos. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I do. So if somebody is acting really arrogant, acting like they know it all, then I will take the piss out of them. And I think that that is a valuable thing. It's worthwhile to respond to those kinds of people in that kind of way. So-called evil people are really just ignorant and in need of knowledge of the good. Well, I totally disagree with this. I'm a hardcore moral anti-realist. I don't think there's such a thing as knowledge of the good. Um, there's these sort of characters that are sometimes described in the meta-ethics literature. One of them is the ideally coherent Caligula. So could there be a person who is perfectly rational, who makes no errors, but who just enjoys causing immense pain and suffering? Could there be an ideally coherent Caligula? And a lot of philosophers will say no. A lot of philosophers will say that if you really are, like, if you really follow the correct rational norms and you have complete knowledge, then you will just see and feel the force of moral obligations. I just couldn't disagree more, right? It just seems to me like, yeah, I mean, there could be somebody who just straight up has values that I think are totally repugnant, but like there's just nothing, there's nothing more I can say to them, there's nothing I can do to show them that they're wrong. Ultimately, I just disagree with their values, and that's that. So, next. Being preoccupied with whether one is a good person or not is a sign that one is a lesser being. Well, I mean, lesser being? I don't know if I'm not sure I'd say lesser being. Certainly, I'm not the kind of person who's particularly preoccupied with following the moral rules, and I wouldn't really want to be friends with the type of person who's preoccupied with that. There is so much there's so much more to a kind of rich and fulfilling life, I think. There are so many projects in life where being preoccupied with following the moral rules is not going to help you achieve greatness. Indeed, it might even get in the way of it. I mean, like in art, for instance, or in philosophy, I just don't think that these sorts of projects have any kind of obvious connection with being a moral person, with following moral rules. In fact, very often when I think about some of my favorite kinds of artworks, for instance, I think there's something aesthetically valuable about artworks that are kind of morally questionable. When you engage with an artwork where there's something where it makes you uncomfortable because its values are kind of skewed. So maybe something like the original Blade Runner, where it's just very clear, I think, that first of all, like the original Blade Runner it presents as a hero a person who is literally hunting slaves and who is a rapist, and it has this like love story, but he's clearly a rapist. It really gets under my skin, that movie. But I love it. I love it partly because of this, right? Because it's like expressing these really kind of creepy and repugnant values, and it sort of forces you into a perspective that makes you uncomfortable. And I think that that's fascinating. I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, it's morally wrong, or at least morally questionable, but it's like aesthetically that creates a very interesting sort of quality. If you are the type of person who's just preoccupied with being a moral saint, you know what? You're probably kind of boring. Well, maybe not. I guess maybe I should say I kind of agree with that. I mock people's religious beliefs. I think it's very important to ruthlessly criticize beliefs that people have a strong emotional attachment to. And people get very emotionally attached to their religious beliefs. Look, it's important to criticize this just because, as I've said earlier, that's kind of how you preserve a free society. And I mean, in the particular context of religion, look, religion is pretty awful in many ways. I think religion can very often encourage mob mentality. Many religions promote utterly repugnant moral values. A lot of religions have a great deal of political power. This isn't just debate within the marketplace of ideas. This shit will have real consequences for people's lives, right, when religions start wielding political power. So yes, I think that criticism is really important. And And moreover, it shouldn't just be a matter of calm, rational, philosophical debate. I think rhetoric does, does play a role here, right? Like, it's important to like actually mock, not just present the arguments. Although, of course, the arguments are worthwhile as well. The highest truths about this world are not rational or analytical, but can be grasped only through a sort of mystical intuition. I'm I'm not sure what to say about this one. On the one hand, I agree that the rational analytical methods are not going to reveal the truths about this world. At least they're not going to be revealing like mind-independent truths. As I've said, I'm kind of a skeptic or a relativist, or depending on the day. So yeah, I actually think that rational analytical methods, when they are applied in the way I want to apply them, they will actually lead you to a sense of just uncertainty, a sense that you have no idea what's going on. So they're not going to lead you to the truth. So, okay, yeah, the highest truths about this world are not rational or analytical. I agree with that, but can be grasped only through mystical intuition. Well, I don't see any reason to suppose that mystical intuition gives you access to the truth. Anyway, do I agree or disagree with this? Also, this is kind of a false dichotomy, right? Because, yeah, there are rational or analytical methods, and then there's mystical intuition, but, well, take art. I mean, I would assume that most artists, when they're creating art, and indeed even most people when they are an audience engaging with art, it's not like they're sitting there working through these long chains of deductive inferences. And it's also not the case that they're just kind of meditating, having Zen Kensho experiences, right? So it's sort of neither. There are alternatives to both of these methods, and I think that art has, just as much a claim to be revealing truths about things as does, the sort of rational analytical methods of philosophy. So I guess the point of all of this is I'm just going to say I neither agree nor disagree. Because if I say that the highest truths about this world are not rational or analytical, but can be grasped only through a sort of mystical intuition. Well, if I say I agree with that, it implies that I think they can be grasped through mystical intuition. If I say I disagree, it implies I think that they are rational or analytical. So I'm just going to keep that in the middle there. People who profess to be gravely concerned with so-called objective truth are really just professing their weakness. Okay, this is phrased in a really undiplomatic and uncharitable way, but I suppose I kind of lean towards agreeing. The reason why I say this is people who are on the realist side will often actually just explicitly say that one of the objections they have to relativism, anti-realism, is that it is dangerous or pernicious. So, when it comes to like relativism about truth, people will say, well, if you're a relativist about truth, then there's just nothing to privilege evolutionary theory over creationism, right? We can't say that the creationists are wrong. If you're a relativist about truth, then like science is just equivalent to voodoo, and that's unacceptable. Like we need to show that certain ways of forming beliefs are privileged, like they really are privileged. Similarly, moral realists will sometimes say that like if moral realism is false, then nothing matters. Life is just without any meaning or purpose or value, and that is unacceptable. That's a that's a terrifying conclusion. I don't think so. Again, there are many arguments against relativist views. There are many sophisticated objections, but I do think that for many of us in philosophy, we adopt when we present these arguments, we're very often engaging in post hoc rationalizations, and what leads us to adopt the positions we do is often just more a matter of feelings, right? And so yes, there are plenty of sophisticated arguments, but I do think that part of the motivation for realism is just a sense that if the relativists are right, then oh my god, there's just there's no value, or that there's no real truth, nobody's really correct, I'm not privileged anymore. I think that is part of it. I also feel realisms have always seemed to me to involve a kind of abdication of responsibility in a sense. So it's like, instead of it being the case that my beliefs and values are acts of my will that I'm taking responsibility for. No, instead, my beliefs and values, from the realist point of view, are just kind of given to me by this external authority. And I suppose, historically, the external authority was literally an authoritative mind. It's God, right? Like, God gives me commands. God is God says, like, the way the world is. God brings the world into existence, and God tells me what I should do. Now, of course, a lot of realists these days won't conceive of things in terms of God, but still there is this external world, and the external world is the authority. So when I hold beliefs about what the facts are, I'm just kind of matching the external world. When I make judgments about what I ought to do, that's just based on these mind-independent values. So it's like I'm kind of shunting off the responsibility. I'm just kind of the receiver of what the external world is giving to me, and yeah. Whereas on my sort of view, no, it's like mine, right? Like these beliefs and values are acts of my own will, and like I'm responsible for them. Well, that's one way to look at it, I guess. Okay, so again, look, this is obviously phrased in a very uncharitable way, but I'm only saying I kind of lean towards agreeing with it in some sense. So I'm gonna say that and finish, and let's see what the results are. Okay, I will just turn off myself so that you can see the results. 80% Hume, 75% Nietzsche. I'm glad that I got only 10% Plato. I would have been really embarrassed if that was a high score. I'm not too happy about 45% on Aristotle and Kant, but yeah. Okay, well, there you are. That's an interesting choice of 7 philosophers. I'm not sure what the basis is for choosing those ones, but that apparently is my philosophical personality, or at least that's what I got this time when I took the test. I remember taking the test before, and the previous time I took it, I got a slightly higher score on Hume and a slightly lower score on Nietzsche, if I recall correctly. So obviously I gave slightly different answers this time. Okay, well, I'm going to end the video there. Thanks for watching.